Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 30. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Simon Marcus, and I work for Museum of London Archaeology, based in Northampton.
Sometimes known as MOLA.
MOLA, yeah.
I believe. Simon, good to have you on the podcast series. What is the object that you've got in the exhibition?
So the object that we've submitted is a 6th century accessory vessel from a burial that we recovered from the site. The burial was one of 157 Saxon burials on the site, and it's the only complete vessel that we had from the entire excavation.
You call it an accessory vessel, so this isn't like a cremation urn into which somebody's ashes would be placed, or is it?
No, it was placed with an inhumation burial, so a body placed into the ground and something placed with them as a grave furnishing. So we might often see things like spearheads, beads, brooches, that kind of thing. This individual had their fantastically decorated pot.
Now, two significant things there. Number one, it's fantastically decorated, you say. Two, it's an accessory urn. Would it have been items of particular interest to the individual who had died that would have been placed with them? Or is this a reference towards the afterlife? And two, why the decoration?
So, in terms of the first part, as far as we can tell, the objects that are placed with the individuals in the graves at Overstone were not represented within the settlement at Overstone. We have no parallels within those sites. So
they're unconnected?
Yeah, so we didn't find any beads within the settlement. We didn't find any brooches within the settlement. And yet we found over 3,200 objects in the graves at Overstone. So we found a lot of other things in the settlement, but those things were not represented in the graves. So as far as we can tell at the moment, the objects placed with the burials were specifically chosen to be placed with the burials. So probably had a significance to the individuals when they were placed there. They weren't necessarily objects that were used in day-to-day life.
So the burial area is still connected to the community then?
Absolutely, yeah. So the site at Overstone itself is split into three portions, separated by natural earthworks. You've got the main settlement area on the southern part of the site. In the central region, you've got a Bronze Age barrow, which was the focus for the Saxon cemetery, and also a handful of other Saxon buildings as well. And then on the north part, you've got the field systems, so open areas where they probably grazed their sheep and things, which were quite important to them in the community there.
So land used for a specific purpose, you could call this, therefore, the graveyard of the community.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
And that's where items of value actually were placed with the deceased.
Yes, yeah.
Which says a lot about belief in the afterlife?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's difficult to know what their thoughts were when they were placing these objects with people. Were they objects they were taking with them to an afterlife? Were they offerings to that individual as a sign of respect for what they did in their life? We don't really know, and obviously not a lot is written from this time in particular to give us a suggestion of why these objects were chosen to be placed with these individuals.
We're recording our conversation right now. The urn, I nearly called it a pot, that would have been the wrong thing to do. The urn isn't actually in front of us. People can come to the exhibition and see for themselves. Is the urn sealed? Are there still objects inside it?
No, it's been emptied out now. So when it was placed into the grave, it didn't have a topper or anything on it. It was full of soil. That was micro-excavated in our lab after the excavations. We didn't excavate the insides in the field, just in case there was anything fragile in there to make sure we preserved as much as possible. What we also haven't done is clean the inside of the vessel. And that's because in future, we might be able to do things like lipid analysis so we can see potentially sort of did it contain dairy products, or, maybe do some other sampling to see what kind of thing was placed into this pot prior to its placement in the burial.
So would the pot have had a previous use for the person before they died, or could food have been an offering to go into the grave with the deceased?
As far as we can tell, there's no signs of use on the pot before it was placed into the burial. There's no damage or anything to it. It was pristine in its condition, other than the fact that it's been in the ground for nearly 1,500 years. So it doesn't seem to have been used for anything other than as a vessel placed with the burial. In terms of what actually was inside it, if anything, we don't know yet. We haven't done that analysis. So it may be that there was food or offerings or something in there. It may have been a very nice brew of beer or something. It may have been completely empty. We don't know yet. But there is ways we can potentially find out with different bits of scientific analysis that we can do.
Simon, we've talked about the urn and the other artefacts that were found around this deceased person. What do we know about the deceased person?
Okay, so they were male, and they were aged sort of roughly between 36 and 45, so they were quite old for the time. They fractured their elbow in early life. We can tell that from the remains of the burial of the person themselves. And although it was allowed to heal, they suffered from osteoarthritis in later life, so probably still plagued them sort of throughout the remainder of their life following its healing. What's also interesting is they had 2 additional teeth, sort of near the canines at the front. So although it doesn't seem to have affected their life, you'd certainly be able to recognise them if you saw them out and about in the settlement. They would have a distinctive smile.
And you talk about osteoarthritis. This person lived a full life then. So they aged in an era when perhaps people didn't live for very many years.
Yeah, they certainly seem to, yeah. And I mean, as best as we can tell, the average life in this period is, around sort of 30 to 40 years. So they lived the life and they didn't sort of expire prematurely. They've definitely sort of lived to the extent we would expect them to live in this time.
Is there any surprise that there is an urn, an accessory urn, I think you described it as? In other words, was this the traditional process in which that part of Northamptonshire, in terms of time, that was how people treated the deceased? Was it common to use urns to deposit accessories into alongside the body of the dead?
Not overly common, but also not unheard of. So in the Overstone cemetery, it's the only burial we had with a complete pot placed with it. We had other burials which had individual or small groups of sherds placed into those graves. That's an entirely different story. And on a nearby site in Northamptonshire at Wakeley, that had a small number of vessels placed with graves as well. But overall, it's quite a rare occurrence, so it isn't the norm that we'd expect to see within these cemeteries.
What's your take on the craftsmanship of the urn itself?
It was highly manufactured. It was very, very high quality in terms of what we can see about it. They took time over the decoration. They made sure it was all neat and looked the part, essentially. So it's not your day-to-day object. We don't have similar decorations, as I said before, on any of the stuff we found from the settlement. It was a specifically highly manufactured object for this grave. It was exceptional quality for the time.
So does this say something about the standing of the person who was buried, or does it say something about the process of burial in its own right?
I think based on what we can see within all of the graves as a whole at Overstone, these were a very rich community. We have a lot of high status objects within these graves. We've got gold gilded brooches. We've got highly decorative glass and amber beads. We've got this fantastic pot that we're showcasing here. There's a lot of high level of craftsmanship shown. We've got ivory from North Africa, so we've got links further afield as well. We've got fantastic group of objects. I say over 3,200 objects in total from the cemetery. This was a thriving community, and very early in the Saxon period as well. The earliest carven date we've got so far suggests that the earliest burial was around sort of 430 AD, which is incredibly early this far inland with this type of material recovered.
So would have these objects come up the River Nen to be in North, what we now call Northamptonshire? Is that their route into what is now the United Kingdom?
Highly likely for this area, yeah. And as I say, this sort of portion of Northamptonshire around the Overstone region seems to be one of the first occupied in this period, and probably focusing on the fact they had that Bronze Age barrow. That's quite a common association that they use in the Saxon period.
We know of other communities from the Roman age at Chester House, further down at Stannock Lakes. Overstone perhaps doesn't really get the headlines as much as some of those other areas. What do we know about the size of the community? It's on, relatively speaking, higher land in Northamptonshire, so would there have been a strategic purpose or a reason why that community based itself there, and how far did it grow?
So in terms of how far it grew, we know there's sort of the modern villages of Overstone. There's the deserted medieval village within Overstone, the grounds of Overstone Hall. There's also Malton, which had a Saxon element to it as well. So there's a lot of thriving communities nearby to the excavations that we did that have Saxon roots. Mm-hmm. So it obviously grew relatively well within that local landscape. In terms of why there is a lot of other archaeology in the area as well. We've talked about the fact that there's the Bronze Age focus for this settlement. There is also Iron Age and Roman. So there is a continued occupation, there's a continued use of this landscape, all the way through, to be honest, from before the Bronze Age. There were live springs on an area to the south, which had evidence for Mesolithic and Neolithic flint work. So we've got communities sort of traversing this landscape before they finally decide to settle. And then you've already got local communities here in the Iron Age and the Roman period. As you transition into sort of the post-Roman period, those people don't disappear. They're just shifting where they're living, essentially. And we're ongoing at the moment with isotope analysis for the burials at Overstone to see, how many of these people were local, how many of them were migrants. Is there a mixture of the two? Is it an entirely new community? Or are they just adopting a style that they're seeing other people adopt post-Roman occupation?
So has this urn thrown up questions for you and Mola, or has it answered questions for you and Mola? From what you say, Simon, there's a lot that we do know, and there's an awful lot of material out there, but there are also quite a number of questions too.
Yeah, and there's always more questions. That's the great thing about archaeology, is there's always more questions. We're never going to get all of the answers to everything. The interesting thing with this urn, it's placed with an adult male. Most pots, as far as we're aware, and sort of fragments of pottery that are placed with graves are either with females or with children. So it's slightly unusual that it's been placed with a male burial. The fact that it's also unique in its decoration style, although the individual elements of the decoration are known, things like the triangular bosses, the incised lines, those are common decorative techniques in the 6th century, but together in the way they're aligned on this pot, as far as we know at the moment, is unique. We don't have any direct comparables where we can look at another pot and say that looks exactly like our Overstone one. So who made it? Was it a locally made object, or was it something they brought in from elsewhere for this individual? And it's the same with all the other objects as well. We've got all these fantastic brooches and the beads and everything. As far as we can tell, within the community at Overstone, their main day-to-day life was processing wool. There was weaving and things like that. We've got lots of evidence for weaving within the settlement. We don't have any evidence for pottery kilns. We don't have any evidence for smelting of glass or metalwork. So it doesn't look like they're producing the goods that we're finding with the burials at the site. So where are they coming from? Who's producing them and why?
So from your point of view as an expert, why should this item be one of the 100 that tells the stories of Northamptonshire, as of course it does?
The interesting thing about this object, along with all of the other things from Overstone, is that it tells the story of how post-Roman Britain thrived. We've got highly decorated objects. We've got incredible wealth seen within this community. Very early into the post-Roman period, we're seeing how the local inhabitants of Northamptonshire, probably with a small impact from external forces, are establishing themselves as a well-built community for a long period of time without Roman rule. They're showing that they didn't need the Romans. Everything in Northamptonshire can thrive on its own. I think that's a fantastic story of sort of self-success of the people in this region.
It's a statement in its own right, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fabulous to hear from you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast series, Simon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.